The storm had rolled across the Masai Mara at dawn, leaving the plains soaked and trembling under the weight of swollen clouds. The Mara River, already known for its unpredictable violence, raged like a living creature, brown, furious, swollen past its banks. For Daniel Mercer, 30-year-old wildlife documentarian from Montana, this was supposed to be a simple scouting morning. Just a walk along the riverbank, camera in hand, listening to the rumble of wilder beasts distance and the low grunts of hippos hidden beneath the churning water. He had no idea his next breath would carry him into the deadliest moment of his life. He was adjusting his lens crouched low near a cluster of reeds when a shrill cry tore through the air. So sharp, so terrified, it snapped through Daniel's spine like electricity. For a split second, he thought it was a bird. But then something small and tawny flashed in his peripheral vision. A lion cub no more than 4 months old slipped on the muddy bank, its paws clawing at nothing, its body skidded toward the river's edge. Daniel watched in horror as the earth beneath the cub collapsed. A chunk of mud gave way and the cub toppled forward, tumbling down the embankment and plunging into the violent current with a splash swallowed instantly by roaring water. Everything in Daniel's training told him to stay back. Never interfere. Let nature take its course. Every documentary filmmaker lived by that rule. They weren't saviors. They were observers. But instinct, pure human instinct, overrode everything. Before the thought fully formed, he was already running. His boots slammed into the mud, slipping, sliding, sinking. The current was deafening, a monstrous roar vibrating up through the soles of his feet. He saw the cub surface once, coughing out a tiny, desperate cry before the river spun it, violently dragging it downstream. Daniel didn't think about the crocodiles. He didn't think about the drop-offs, the hidden rocks, the deadly underholes that had taken even seasoned rangers by surprise. He thought only one thing: I can't let it die. He dropped his camera and lunged into the river. The cold hit him like a punch to the ribs. His breath vanished. His limbs seized, but he forced them to move. The river slammed against him, rammed its chest, trying to fold him under like a sheet of paper. He clawed his way through the current, every stroke of battle. Mud stung his eyes. Debris battered his legs. Somewhere beneath him, he felt a log strike hard against his shin. Another slammed into his shoulder so fiercely he saw white stars flash across his vision. But he could still see the cub, tiny head, the frantic paws. The small body rolling helplessly through the current like a discarded rag. "Hold on," Daniel shouted, though his own voice drowned instantly under the river's roar. He lunged again. His fingers brushed fur, then lost it. The cub disappeared beneath the surface. Panic surged through him, choking him harder than the water. He ducked under blindly searching lungs burning. Then he felt it, a paw, small, weak. Daniel grabbed and pulled, kicking upward with everything he had left. They broke the surface together. The cub sputtered, coughing water clinging to his shoulder in sheer animal terror. Its tiny claws dug into his shirt, its trembling body pressed against his chest. "It's okay," Daniel gasped. "I've got you." But he didn't have himself. The current was dragging them sideways toward the deepest channel. The one Kenyan guides called the river's mouth of death, the place where crocodiles waited in the murky silence. Daniel kicked hard, but his strength was gone. His arms felt like sandbags. His breath came in broken, ragged bursts. The cub clung tighter. Another wave smashed into them, nearly ripping the cub from his grasp. He held it with both hands, now sacrificing stability for security. "Not today," he whispered, voice barely audible above the thunder of water. "Not you." With every ounce of strength, he had Daniel aim for the nearest patch of shallows just 30 feet away. But the river was merciless. It shoved them, twisted them, spun them as if mocking his attempt to fight back. His boots caught on something underwater. His foot wedged between rocks. The current yanked him forward while his legs stayed trapped. A searing bolt of pain shot through his knee. He screamed. The cub squealed. Daniel's flailed the river, tried to rip the cub away. In a moment of blind desperation, he bent forward, curling around the little creature, shielding it with his own body as the current tore at them. His trapped leg burned. His chest heaved. The world started to fade around the edges. "This can't be it," he rasped. Then through the haze of terror, the roar of the river thinned just for a moment, and he heard something else. Growls, dozens of them. He looked up and froze. Because standing along the entire ridge of the riverbank, soaking wet paws planted in the mud, amber eyes fixed on him with unnerving intensity, was the pride. Not one lion, not two, but an entire circle of full-grown lions. Their bodies tensed, their gaze locked on the cub in his arms and on him. Daniel's blood turned to ice. He had saved the cub, but now he was trapped in a moment that no rule of the wild could explain, and no human instinct could possibly prepare him for what would come next. The moment Daniel's foot wrenched free from the rocks, he staggered toward the shallows with the cub pressed tight against his chest. Each breath burned. His muscles trembled. Mud pulled at his legs like hands trying to drag him back into the river's rage. But he forced himself forward until the water reached only his knees. That was when he dared to lift his head and fully comprehend what waited for him on the bank. The pride was no longer a distant blur. They were close, too close, lined across the ridge like statues made of muscle and instinct. The air trembled around them. Her eyes did not blink. Their tails flipped in slow, controlled arcs. Even the wind seemed to Daniel's pulse hammered so violently he felt it in his throat, in his temples, in the soles of his feet. He had photographed lions for more than a decade, but never had he been this near to an entire pride while holding one of their cubs. The size of them was overwhelming: their chests, deep shoulders, broad paws large enough to pin a man with ease. And at the center was the matriarch, a lioness with a scar slicing across her muzzle eyes, sharp and intelligent, her stare locked onto Daniel. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't confusion. It was judgment. Every survival instinct Daniel screamed at him to put the cub down, to drop it gently in the mud and back away. But his legs were still shaking from the river's violence, and his arms were locked from exhaustion. He couldn't trust his body to move without collapsing. The cub whimpered softly and nuzzled into his The sound changed everything. A low rumble swept the pride, a sound like distant thunder. Not a roar, not a growl, but something older, deeper. The lionesses stepped forward in a synchronized movement that shivered through Daniel's spine. Their paws sank into the wet earth with terrifying silence. The massive male at the edge of the formation lifted its mane, rippling in the breeze like a warning flag. Daniel swallowed hard. He had seen predatory charges before. He had filmed lions hunting buffalo, chasing zebras, taking down wilder beasts with explosive force. He knew what it looked like when lions prepared to strike, and every sign he was seeing now matched that exact pattern. The tension in their muscles, the narrowing of their eyes, the quietness, absolute focus, quietness before an attack. His heart thudded painfully against his ribs. His fingers tightened reflexively around the cub. Even though he knew this protective gesture might mean nothing in the face of a pride's fury, he whispered, "Please, I'm not here to hurt you." The wind carried the scent of the river of mud of fear, his fear, straight toward the lions. Some of the lionesses flared their nostrils, tasting it. Their ears lifted, their tails twitched. Daniel could feel the shift in the atmosphere. Pressure heavy and suffocating settled over the clearing, as if the entire world leaned in to watch what happened next. It felt impossible to be this close to so many apex predators without becoming prey. His mouth went dry. His vision sharpened. His thoughts narrowed into a single devastating truth. They could kill him in less than 3 seconds. He took one slow step backward, boots sinking into the mud. The movement triggered a chain reaction. 2 lionesses mirrored him with synchronized steps. Another lowered her head, muscles rippling under her tawny coat as she angled slightly to cut off any retreat. The male's amber eyes darkened. Daniel realized something chilling. They weren't guessing what he was. They were deciding. The cub in his arms gave a faint chirping call toward the pride. That sound, soft, fragile pleading, shattered the tension for a heartbeat. The matriarch's ears twitched. She recognized the voice. She stepped forward, paws gliding silently across the wet earth. Daniel froze completely. She was close enough now that he could see the individual whiskers on her muzzle, the tiny scar beneath her right eye, the faint flecks of river mud on her fur from when she must have tracked her cub to the riverbank. She gave a low, deliberate chuff, a message, a command. Instantly, the rest of the pride stopped advancing. The matriarch's gaze moved slowly first to Daniel's face, then to the cub, clinging to him. Her pupils narrowed. Her chest expanded with a deep breath that rumbled through the air. She lowered her head inch by inch until her nose hovered just inches from the cub. Daniel didn't dare exhale. If she interpreted Hutch's harm, if she thought he had caused this injury, if she saw him as an enemy, this would end in blood. The matriarch inhaled again. Her nostrils flared. Her breath brushed Daniel's chin and head, the cub lion pressing itself tighter to Daniel's chest. For a moment, the lioness went utterly still. Then her gaze slowly lifted to Daniel's eyes, and what Daniel saw there terrified him more than any snarl or threat. Not because it promised violence, but because it held understanding, recognition, judgment, a decision. The matriarch stepped back one pace. The pride watched her waiting. Daniel's breath came out in a shudder. Was this approval, permission, or the calm before an attack? Another lioness moved. A deep growl vibrated the air, and she took a step forward, her lips pulling back just enough to reveal teeth that could crush bone in a single bite. Daniel's chest tightened. This was it. This was the moment everything would turn. He squeezed his eyes shut, clutching the cub one last time as his legs prepared to buckle. Then the growl was cut short. Silence. A soundless command rippled through the pride, invisible yet absolute. When Daniel opened his eyes, he found the matriarch inches from him again. But this time, her posture had changed completely. Her head bowed, her shoulders lowered, her gaze softened. And in that breathless stillness, Daniel understood she wasn't preparing to kill him. She was acknowledging him. The world had stopped breathing because something impossible was unfolding. Something no camera, no biologist, no rule of the wild had ever prepared him for. A pride of lions had surrounded him, not to attack, but to decide whether he had earned their trust, and the answer was beginning to reveal itself in the most hauntingly beautiful way. The matriarch did not move at first. She stood still as stone, only the slow rise and fall of her chest, proving she was alive. Daniel held the against him, water still dripping from his clothes, his breath shallow, as if the wrong exhale might snap whatever fragile thread was holding the moment. Together, the other lionesses remained poised in a semicircle behind their leader. Their bodies were taut with barely contained force, ready to launch forward or retreat, depending entirely on what the matriarch chose. Everything hinged on her. The cub gave a soft, rasping cry. It was not the sound he had made in the water, but something smaller, something searching. The matriarch's ears flicked toward it, and Daniel saw her composure crack with a brief instant. Her pupils expanded, her tail stilled completely. The instinct of a mother, raw, ancient, and immovable, rose to the surface. Still, she held back. Daniel realized she was studying him just intently as she was listening to her cub. Her gaze moved over his face, the trembling in his arms, the bruising on his shoulder, the mud caked across his clothes. But most of all, she fixated on the way the cub clung to him, tiny paws wrapped around his neck, the small head buried against his chest. The matriarch tilted her head slightly. It was a surprisingly human gesture, curiosity wrapped in caution. Daniel swallowed hard. "I didn't hurt him," he whispered. "I promise." His voice shook. He knew she couldn't understand the words, but tone was universal, and he hoped she could feel there was no malice in him, only exhaustion and a desperate plea for her to see the truth. The matriarch shifted her weight and stepped forward, not aggressively, not asserting dominance, but with purpose. Each movement carried the weight of experience of leadership, of the quiet intelligence that separates a lioness from the rest of her pride. Daniel felt the air tighten as she came close enough that her breath warmed his dripping clothes. She lowered her head again this time, not to scent the cub, but to scent him. Her nose brushed his forearm. Daniel's heart climbed to his throat. She inhaled deeply, smelling the river, the mud, and the cub's scent wound tightly around his own. Her whiskers ticked against his wrist. The sensation sent a shock of fear through him, but he fought to stay still. The lioness drew back slightly, her amber eyes locking onto his once more. Something passed between them then. Not language, not instinct, recognition. Not the kind that said, "You are prey," nor the defensive recognition of "you are a threat." This was different, something older, more deliberate, kind of understanding that surfaces only when a creature looks at another. Being and sees intention instead of form. She exhaled a warm gut air fog briefly in the cool morning light. Then she made a sound soft, controlled, hauntingly gentle. Chuff, a mother sound, a welcome, an acknowledgement. Behind her, the lions reacted instantly. Ears softened, bodies eased, tails lowered from rigid arcs to loose sways. A unity of understanding rippled through the pride in a way that could never be mistaken for coincidence. The matriarch had made her decision. She stepped closer until her forehead almost brushed Daniel's. For a moment, he thought she might be testing him the last time. But instead she leaned in and rested her forehead lightly against his shoulder. Not forceful, not dominant, grateful. Daniel rose. The weight of her touch, the warmth of her breath, the near silent rumble of her chest. It was almost too much for his mind to process. This was not an apex predator warning him. This was a mother embracing the being who had returned her child. The cub wriggled, then reaching toward her. The matriarch pulled back just enough to allow Daniel to lower the cub into her waiting paws. He placed the tiny lion gently at her feet, his arms trembling with relief. The cub chirped again, then pressed his head into her fur with a desperate urgency. Her response was immediate. She curled her massive frame around him, grooming him in long, deliberate strokes. Each stroke was both a reassurance and an inspection, checking his breathing, his warmth, his heartbeat. When she confirmed he was alive and unharmed, the lioness looked up again, but not at her pride, at Daniel. Her amber eyes softened. There was something in them that stretched beyond instinct. Something rooted in memory and the quiet intelligence that had carried her through years of leading a family. Daniel felt the truth of it settle inside him like a weight. She understood he had saved her cub. She recognized what he had done, and she was acknowledging it. Another lioness approached, then, younger and restless, curious enough to inch too close. The matriarch's head snapped toward her with a warning growl, not aggressive, but authoritative. The younger lioness backed off immediately, lowering herself in respect. It was clear the matriarch had extended her trust to Daniel, but only her. Anyone who challenged that decision would answer to her. Daniel slowly picked up a single step, not to flee, but to give her space. The matriarch followed his movement with her eyes, but not with suspicion. More like she's measuring him, learning him, committing him to memory. The kind of memory a lioness keeps for life. A breeze swept across the riverbank, carrying the scent of wet and acacia blossoms. Daniel felt inside him settle something that had been twisted tight since the moment he stepped into the river. The matriarch dipped her head once more, the closest thing to a bow he would ever receive from a wild animal. He whispered, "Thank you." Her ears twitched. She exhaled and the sound soft and calm. Then, with the cub safely nestled at her feet, she turned her body not away from him, but beside him, as if inviting him into the circle she had created, as if for this moment alone, he was not an outsider, but a part of something larger, older, and infinitely more powerful. Recognition had replaced instinct, and the matriarch had made her choice, not to harm him, but to honor him. The moment Daniel backed away from the matriarch, her rescued cub, he expected the fragile miracle to end. He thought the pride would reclaim its space close ranks and resume the natural distance that separates humans from Africa's most formidable predators. But what happened next shattered every boundary he believed existed between their world and his. The matriarch did not dismiss him. She watched him. Her eyes traced every step he took, not as a threat, not as prey, but almost as if ensuring he stayed upright, ensuring he was safe. Then she rose, nudged her cub gently toward another lioness for safekeeping, and walked toward Daniel, not to intimidate, but to direct. Her massive frame moved with slow purpose, her paws pressing quietly into the mud beside him. He froze uncertain. She huffed softly and flicked her tail once, a signal. He had seen lions communicate with subtle cues during years photographing them. Tail movements, ear angles, low-frequency vibrations, but never directed toward a human. She took a few steps forward, paused, and glanced back at him. It was unmistakable. She wanted him to walk. Daniel swallowed hard breaths, shaky, and took a tentative step. The matriarch resumed walking immediately, matching his pace, as though they were tethered by an invisible line of understanding. Behind them came a rumble. The rest of the pride was rising. For lionesses formed a loose half-circle behind Daniel, each one stepping into position with remarkable synchronization. They were not approaching him aggressively. Instead, they created a protective barrier, placing themselves between him and the open terrain where other predators might lurk. Even the massive male lion, who rarely moved without reason, padded forward with a kind of regal dignity and took his place at Daniel's left flank. It was a formation Daniel had only seen in documentaries describing how lions escort vulnerable members of their pride. Except now, he was the one they were escorting. Daniel's heart pounded as he walked, feeling the heat radiating from the lioness bodies. Each footfall of the male sent subtle tremors through the ground. The lionesses flanked him so closely he could hear their steady breathing. the soft rhythm of it strangely reassuring. And then, as if choreographed by something ancient and unseen, they began moving in unison. Left paw, right paw, left paw, right paw. The rhythm echoed like a heartbeat around Daniel. He walked in the center of a procession no human had ever been part of. As they moved across the riverbank, he realized they weren't just leading him away. They were surrounding him, shielding him, escorting him with the reverence that lions reserved only for those they accepted into their family. However briefly, the air grew impossibly quiet. No birds, no insects, just the soft thrum of paws and Daniel's own unsteady breaths. Once they reached firm ground, the male lion halted, lifting his massive head to survey the horizon. His nostrils flared as he tested the wind. When he detected nothing threatening, he gave a low grunt. Deep and resonant, a command. The lionesses shifted instantly, tightening their formation. The matriarch moved to the front beside Daniel, guiding him forward once more. Daniel's thoughts spun wildly. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't normal, wasn't natural, wasn't even plausible. He had read every behavioral study on lions during his years of photography. Nothing in the scientific record described this. Yet here he was walking in step with an entire pride as though he were a guest of honor. They approached the acacia tree where his equipment lay scattered from wind. He had dropped everything to jump into the river. Daniel saw his tripod half buried in mud. His camera bag soaked, his telephoto lens lying at an angle that made his jaw tighten. But he had never been more grateful to see anything in his life. The pride slowed as they approached the tree. The lionesses parted two symmetrical lines, creating a pathway so precise that any wildlife biologist reviewing the footage would later describe as ritualistic, almost ceremonial. Daniel stepped into the center of their formation, the crunch of dry leaves beneath his boots sounding impossibly loud. The lions did not break ranks. They maintained the path until he fully reached the base of the tree. Then the matriarch approached him one final time. Her paws were silent on the earth, her breath warm, her presence overwhelming. Daniel felt himself go still, not from fear now, but from awe. She stood before him and lifted her head. For a breathless moment, she simply watched him. Then she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. A gentle, deliberate pressure, a gesture of trust, of gratitude, of a bond that defied species and instinct, and every rule written in the savannah's ancient code. Daniel closed his eyes, absorbing the astonishing reality of it. When she pulled back, she released a low chuff, a soft farewell. The lionesses moved first, peeling away from the formation and returning to the recovering cub, who was now attempting to climb onto his mother's back. The male lion remained for a few seconds longer. He regarded Daniel with an expression that felt ancient and knowing, as though assessing whether this strange human was truly worthy of the honor he had shown. Then he dipped his head just slightly and turned away. One by one, the pride disappeared into the tall gold grass. Their silhouettes blurred in the shifting heat, becoming part of the landscape once more. Daniel stood alone beneath the acacia tree, water still dripping from his closed hands, shaking from adrenaline and wonder. He should hide. He should have been mauled or charged or met with suspicion so fierce it ended him. Instead, he had been protected, escorted, honored by a pride of wild lions. And deep inside him, something fundamental shifted. He understood in a way he never had before that the line between human and animal was far thinner than most believed. That compassion, pure, unspoken, instinctive, could cross boundaries stronger than fear. As the sun dipped behind the plains, Daniel realized he had witnessed something that would change science, conservation, and his own heart forever. The lion had shown him their world, and for a moment made a place for him inside it. In the days that followed the extraordinary encounter, Daniel found himself unable to return to normal life. Every time he looked at his hands, he could still feel the warmth of the matriarch's forehead pressed against his. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the gentle chuff of farewell, the procession of lions parting grass like royal guard. The rescued cub brushing against his leg as though he were an old friend. It felt unreal, impossible even. But the footage on his action camera told a different story. It was all there. Every second, every gesture, every moment that defied every law of predator behavior he had ever learned. And as soon as the footage reached the scientific community, the world erupted. The first to respond were the behavioral ecologists in Nairobi. many of whom had spent decades studying the emotional lives of big cats. They reviewed the footage multiple times, slow motion and frame by frame. They saw what Daniel had seen, the absence of fear in the pride, the matriarch's calm assessment of him, the deliberate formation of lions walking him to safety. But the debates began immediately. Some insisted it was instinct, a misdirected maternal response triggered by cub's distress. Others argued that the lions were merely curious, not protective. A few suggested coincidence and projection, claiming Daniel wanted to believe the lions had shown him gratitude. But none of their theories held up when faced with the footage of the grooming. When the matriarch placed her rough tongue on Daniel's forehead, she wasn't confused. She wasn't experimenting. She was performing a pride-greeting ritual that lions reserve only for those they trust. And the way the other lionesses responded, calm, accepting, non-threatening, defied the instinctual chaos that should have erupted when a human knelt in the middle of their pride. More scientists reviewed the footage. More theories fell apart, and then came the revelation from the Masai Mara archives. A researcher comparing markings and scars discovered something that made the entire puzzle click into place. The matriarch had once been part of a pride affected by a deadly drought nearly a decade earlier. During that period, several lionesses had been forced to abandon one of their young temporarily while searching for water. According to records by a local conservation team, a ranger had stepped in, lifting an oated cub from the scorching rocks and providing shade until the pride returned. The matriarch had been that cub. She had survived because a human once protected her. Now, years later, when her own cub was in danger, she had seen Daniel's act for exactly what it was. Protection, not interference. Recognition, not threat. She had made her decision not from instinct, but from memory, and memory the scientists reluctantly admitted could not be quantified. The footage spread across international news networks. Commentators spoke about empathy, instinct, and the thin line between human and animal awareness. Documentarians requested interviews. A team from National Geographic flew in within days to capture follow-up footage and analyze the pride's behavior. But when Daniel returned to the savannah, he wasn't prepared for what awaited him. He had expected the lions to ignore him or disappear into the tall grass. But as his jeep rolled slowly across the plains and approached the familiar grove of acacia trees, a low, rumbling chuff drifted across the wind. The matriarch emerged first. She was larger in the daylight than he remembered, powerful, scarred, radiant in the golden sun. And behind her padded the young cub he had saved, no longer weak or trembling, but full of life and curiosity. The pride trailed behind them with the effortless authority of creatures who belonged entirely to the land they ruled. Daniel stepped out of the vehicle slowly, hands visible, breath steady. The matriarch approached without hesitation. She stopped just a few feet from him. There was no tension, no sign of warning, only recognition. Then, to the astonishment of the film crew behind him, she released a soft chuff and dipped her head, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. The same gesture she had day he saved cub. Daniel felt emotion choke his throat. He whispered hello again. The cub trotted up beside her and bumped gently against Daniel's leg, the same curious nuzzle he had given him after the rescue. The young lion's amber eyes met Daniel's, and something unspoken passed between them. Something ancient, something pure. Trust. For the next 10 minutes, the bride simply existed around him, resting beneath the shade, grooming each other. The male lion stretched lazily and rolled onto his side. The lioness dozed. The cub circled Daniel twice, sniffed the camera back, then climbed onto a rock to watch him with childlike wonder. It was peace, absolute, unshakable peace. And Daniel understood something that no scientific study could ever fully articulate. Lions had not protected him because of instinct. They had protected him because they recognized him. Because compassion, when given freely, creates echoes that reach across years, species, and the invisible walls humans think exist between themselves and the wild. The scientific reports would eventually classify Daniel's experience as anomalous behavior, a term used when data defies explanation. But the heart of millions who watched the footage knew better. Some truths don't fit into charts. Some moments can't be measured. Some bonds can't be explained, only felt. Weeks later, when Daniel stood on a conference stage in New York, recounting the rescue to an auditorium filled with conservationists, journalists, and ordinary people moved by the story, he said only one sentence that silenced the entire room. Maybe animals don't need to learn gratitude. Maybe we're the ones who need to remember it. The crowd rose in a standing ovation, and some crossed the ocean. Beneath the Kenyan sun, a lion pride lay resting in the tall grass, unaware of the global impact of their extraordinary act, but forever part of a story that proves something the human world often forgets. The heart remembers what the mind tries to explain away. And sometimes the wild understands us far better than science ever will. In the end, what happened on the banks of the Mara River was far more than a dramatic rescue or a viral miracle caught on camera. It was a moment that forced us humans, who often see ourselves as separate from the wild, to confront a truth we rarely acknowledge: that the distance between our hearts and the hearts of the creatures we share this planet with is much smaller than we think. Daniel went into the river believing he was breaking a rule. Wildlife photographers are trained never to interfere, never to alter nature's path, never to become part of the story. But when he saw the tiny lion cub being pulled under the muddy river, all those rules dissolved into something older and deeper, a universal instinct to protect the vulnerable. And from that very moment, the story stopped being about what he risked. It became about what the lions recognized. Because the pride didn't surround him with violence, they surround him with understanding. The matriarch didn't roar in rage. She bowed in acknowledgement. The pride didn't escort out as a prisoner. They escort out as an honored guest. And the cub, the little life he saved, looked at him, not with fear, but with a gentle curiosity that spoke to something pure, something unspoiled. The awareness that kindness had touched his world, even if he didn't yet know why. If there is a message in this extraordinary encounter, it isn't simply that lions can show gratitude or that humans can feel passion. It's that every living creature, whether walking in 2 legs or 4, carries the capacity to recognize good when it appears, even across species, even across worlds, even across instincts that should divide us. A matriarch's gesture, a simple grooming of Daniel's forehead, reminds us that gratitude is not a human invention. Respect is not a human privilege. And memory, especially the memory of being saved, protected, or understood, lives in the hearts of animals in ways science still struggles to explain. That single moment, a lioness extending her trust to a human, is a reminder of something we often forget in a world full of noise and division. That courage is contagious, that kindness is universal, and that the instinct to protect the helpless is one of the oldest truths on Earth. Daniel didn't set out to change minds or rewrite scientific theories. He simply listened to that small voice inside that said, "Do the right thing even if no one else would." And because of that choice, he witnessed something the world is still talking about. A pride of lions acting not out of fear, aggression, or territorial instinct, but out of what can only be called moral recognition. When animals show us who they are, when they reveal intelligence, we underestimated emotions. We dismissed memories. If we doubted, we are given a rare chance to see ourselves more clearly, too. We're reminded that compassion is not weakness, that bravery is not loud, and that sometimes the most extraordinary acts happen quietly in the muddy water of a river or in the soft chuff of a lioness, saying, "I understand." This story urges to reflect on the way we treat the world around us. It reminds us that nature is not something separate from humanity. We are part of it, shaped by it, dependent on it, and responsible for it. Our choices matter not just to us, but to every creature who shares the earth with us. And if a wild lioness can recognize a human's good intentions, if a pride can offer safe passage to someone who saved one of their own, then perhaps we too can learn to see beyond fear, beyond difference, beyond instinct. Perhaps we can learn to choose compassion first. If Daniel's story has touched you, if it made your heart race, or your eyes sting, or your belief in goodness feel a little stronger, then stay with us. There are so many more extraordinary moments happening in the world. Stories that remind us that hope is real and that kindness still shapes the world in ways we can't always see. Please subscribe to the channel because your support gives us strength, motivation, and resources to keep bringing you these powerful true stories that celebrate passion, courage, and the incredible connections between humans and the wild. Thank you for being here. Thank you for believing in these stories. And remember, some of the greatest miracles on Earth happen when one living being simply chooses to protect.